Nothing on this show is authorized by the Food and Drug Administration, and nothing said here is intended to treat, cure, prevent, or diagnose any disease. Contact your physician before starting a diet or exercise regimen, including supplementation. This is not medical advice and is for entertainment purposes only.
You gotta wait for the drop. Very nice.
All right, we're back.
We just started. Welcome to the Suppworks podcast. All right, today we've got a really good one for you. This is Dr. Robert Wildman, formerly of Dymatize, formerly of Premier Protein, formerly of Power Bar, formerly of GNC, formerly of Arla, and the chair of the International Protein Board. The man is all things whey protein. Welcome to the show.
Super excited to be here. And thanks for the music there. That's going to make my daughter happy.
Good. Does she like Green Day too?
Oh, who doesn't like Green Day?
Well, I mean, I know you've been doing vacation amongst, running all over the entire nation here in all over the summer. So I appreciate you're able to come in. Part of why I wanted you to come in is that, and I'm going to start it off on this note, is that we've had a lot of state laws coming up recently in the United States trying to restrict access of dietary supplements to people under the age of 18, which I think when it comes to whey protein is a particularly preposterous notion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think protein in general is somehow got looped in there, with some of the state bills, but not all of them. And then if the protein is inclusive of some of the other ingredients that are part of it, then the protein can get sucked into the into that statute as well.
Well, what does the wording go? Like something, if it's marketed as like a muscle building supplement?
Muscle building, which easily can get conflated with whey protein. And there was a recent part that there's that group over in Harvard that is pushing all this agenda. That they said that certain muscle building supplements, and I guess in this case whey protein could be considered, or even carbs, I guess, could be considered part of that group, are a gateway drug to anabolic steroids.
Yeah, isn't that great? I mean, that's just, I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, that institution, and I've said this before, and this gets a little sensitive for me. Sure. Because as a former academic and still holding adjunct positions at universities, I'm a little offended and I'm a little embarrassed for them, especially because it is associated with Harvard University,
Which is a prestigious university.
Yeah, slightly. So and it's just I don't understand how the traction is happening at the state level, like how and where is the
due diligence? About saving the children.
Yeah, I totally understand that, but the due diligence and the process of investigation and really kind of digging into the legitimacy of how they're positioning it is just a little bit dumbfounded. It goes against the scientific process.
But they come from a completely different world of science. I mean, if you pay attention to like who's involved there, they're not people that understand things like you do. They are people that are psychologists. They are people who like have their degrees in public health and public health administration, and they're like kind of combining those worlds, saying that the weight loss is going to lead to eating disorders and that the muscle building stuff is going to lead to anabolic steroid use. And I think it's important. It's like our job to kind of delineate those things and try to help, send that message to the people. It's like, just because you have whey protein, which is what people who actually work out and train or play sports or whatever do, it doesn't mean you're going to end up taking anabolic steroids. Like there's that, I don't know what world that does exist in. Now, on the other hand, I guarantee everyone who takes anabolic steroids takes whey protein.
There's probably some truth to that. But look, everyone takes protein. It's not just subject to people who are lifting weights.
Yeah, it's an association thing. And, and I think, with the focus on eating disorders and, weight loss products, I just wonder why they didn't go with the far pendulum swing on the other pattern of disordered eating, which is obesity, which, is clearly defined as an eating disorder as well. And so why, the association with the consumption of weight loss supplementation is actually higher in very overweight people. So why not stand up for them?
I mean, probably because it's a battle worth fighting. It would make too much sense, Rob.
But I think your point is really interesting earlier that the collective degrees within the group are public health oriented and so forth, which would beg the need to involve more of the physiological scientists in this to better understand. Plus, to go beyond some basic poorly designed research involving surveys and whatnot. To draw your conclusions and to take action the way that they have. It's just not there. Sue Hewlings wrote a really nice review paper, a couple of years ago where she reviewed, and her background is in eating disorders. And Sue and I went to Florida State together, go Noles, along with Doug Kalman. And Arnie Ferrando, I'm going to throw all my Knowles out there, and the late great Kevin Tipton. But my mom was an eating disorders counselor. We grew up with anorexia and bulimia in the family and so forth. So I've grown up with this, and I was actually kind of amazed by that this was happening when I first came across this several years ago. And it's still amazing. But she did a really nice review of the research that is actually out there that would have, pertinent application to this topic. And basically, the conclusions, of this scientist is that it's unfounded.
Yeah. And I also didn't mention earlier that you're the chair of the Sports Nutrition Committee at the APA, or the American Herbal Products Association, which it's one of the trade groups that I'm even involved in. And I think that that's a really cool thing. And, that's where I learned about a lot of this stuff is through something that they have, which is an alliance of like 4 different trade organizations called the Dietary Supplement Access Coalition. And I've been keeping up with this for almost a year now, ever since these laws started popping up. And it seems like now that they've all kind of gone quiet. And I think that, once again, that could be like a political kind of thing. We've had an election since then. And since that election, we've had pandemonium. And part of that pandemonium might be, I think one of the best things to come out of it is this Make America Healthy Again initiative. Which may be a strong part of like why these age restriction laws kind of died off, because I think they're going to start attacking like some bigger problems. What do you think of that as far as like how it started and like how it's going?
Well, I think that's a fair assessment. It does seem like things have sort of calmed down, especially with the state bills. It's, New York is the first state in which it was signed into law, but it's not being enforced.
No. So
I think what's happening is there's a lot of watching, what's happening here. And the thing is, I mean, California was early in drafting its legislation, and it got pushed back and so forth. And, the idea is that you capture New York and you capture California, and all the states in between start, wondering whether or not they should be a Me Too. And, there are some type of activities that are happening. And I mean, there must be 15 states, at this time. And they're in, some degree of assembly, committee, up to Senate, can move forward, but it has to the end of the year to do it, or has been pushed back and it's being redrafted or whatever. It's just sort of, very dynamic with the different states. So I think there's a little bit of watch and see, what's happening in New York. And then also, some of the trade, APA has been very involved at the state levels.
Oh, yeah.
And, certainly have taken all kinds of steps to help educate, to help, create greater awareness of what the different components of this and what it means, and some of the difficulties and so forth. And I think it's been really helpful. We just have to, I think there's a little bit of a wait and see right now. And, there's some other bright, shiny objects that are happening simultaneously.
which is like that Maha conversation.
Yeah.
And when I was at the Sports and Active Nutrition Summit, like I think it was 2 years ago, I made a statement that was kind of bold, talking about like 30 years after the implementation of Deshay, that it deserved to have some sort of like revisiting, or a Deshay 2.0. And after going to the Hill like a couple of times, it seems like that's starting to gain traction, especially with this Make America Healthy Again initiative. What opportunities on like a policy standpoint do you think that you would like to see or take charge of? I mean, even especially in the context of protein, what do you think should be revisited there?
Well, I think there's a lot of good regulations right now. I think that I think there should be more bridging between industry and congressional leadership, and to better understand where the needs are to reduce the opportunity for, whether it's class action lawsuit or, misbranding or something like that. Just to, now's a good time to really kind of see if we can help the industry more through revisiting everything from, Deshay, labeling guidelines and so forth. Because, realistically, I mean, laying out even the dietary supplements, there's a lot of evolution within that space that still needs to be, we almost need to catch up.
Yeah. That's what I feel like.
Yeah. The state of the dietary supplements, that industry in 1994 is vastly different than 2024, and the gas pedal is all the way down at this point. It's just going to keep moving faster and faster. Even around some of the areas like, calories from amino acids.
Yeah.
That's still, there's still, sort of two sides of the fence there. You have labeling regulations that say that, in excess of 5 or more calories, all calories need to be declared. And then you have other, that will argue that, well, since on dietary supplements, you're unable to call amino acids, or you're not able to count amino acids as protein, therefore the consumer would be confused if you label calories, but there's no macronutrients that would account for it.
That's interesting. That's a cool nuance that I got called out on a couple of years ago.
Do you have to put calories on the supplement facts panel?
In actuality, there is data that shows all the different caloric values of every single amino acid that there is there. And like leucine at 3 grams has a caloric value.
Yeah.
Unquestionably. But not everyone knows this. I think
every supplement has a calorie.
Well, not every supplement does have a calorie, but just look at the context of like branched chain amino acids. Essentially, do you have any amino acids in here? You got any EAAs?
They're up there. You can't reach them.
Ed, grab us an EAA. But you pick any of these EAAs off the shelf, and TK makes a lot of labels for everybody, so he's done this a bunch. I bet all of them have like 0 calories on them.
Well, that's why I'm asking, because first there's a difference between how you label it as a nutritional facts panel, right? That would be considered as a food item.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different rules for that opposed with protein specifically, because you'll see protein go either way depending on where the brand kind of wants to sell it. Sometimes if it's in like grocery, they want to have a nutritional facts panel. Sometimes if it's like at Joe's supplement shop, it'll have a supplement facts panel. But not all supplement facts panels have calories on them.
Well, if they're by law,
it's a hydration. Do an EAA max. You're gonna have to climb up there. Yeah.
Yeah, but by law, if the calories exist, you
got to claim them.
You have to claim them, and the idea that the consumer will not understand if you're not listing protein, you're still going below the line and you're listing the amino acids. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't take a lot to know that amino acids, which are from protein, if you digested chicken or eggs or whatever, by and large, it's absorbed as amino acids, and those amino acids can be used to build protein, or they can be, used and oxidized for energy, or converted to other energy molecules, which ultimately be oxidized for energy as well. So, they have energy potential, and it should be listed. There's certainly other ingredients that are calorie contributors that don't neatly fall into carbohydrates, proteins, and fats.
Yep.
the organic acids like citric acid, malic acid,
Which also have caloric
tartaric
values.
acid. Yeah, so I
Or
mean,
sugar alcohols, they even do.
yeah. My daughter asked the other day. She's like, "Dad, why does my Monster have 10 calories if there's no sugar in it?" And I said, "Well, it's because of the acids primarily. So once you achieve 5 calories, and the organic acids are largely in the twos, like 2.3, 2.4 calories per gram. So they're there, and you have to account for it." Typically, if you send it out to a third-party lab to be tested, a lot of times it'll just be bucketed into carbohydrates. And I think it's Handbook 74, USDA Handbook 74, that actually suggests that, or there's some regulation that suggests that that's a good place for you to include, that calorie contributor like the citric acid, malic acid. It can fall into carbohydrates, but you can easily argue that you don't have to.
It's not a carb.
So this
It's
is
not a carb.
0 calorie, but you can look at that label and you can see that the math doesn't quite check out.
No, and I see this all the time. It's and the thing about how about that?
I can account for 9 out of the 10 that are represented there, but the amino acids are not represented at all.
No. So
Do you have to represent the amino acids?
Well, that's the weird thing about the law and everything right now. Like,
Is there some proteins where they ask us, can you please put this amino profile on the label? And it's a huge box.
That's different. That's the content of the amino acids within the protein.
Okay.
Yeah, but these are just formulated in as individual amino acids, or
They're free.
Yeah, we like to call them free-form amino acids. So they're there. They have calories. Other examples are sugar alcohols, which really aren't sugar, and they're where do you put them? So that's why they kind of got slotted into that carbohydrate space, if you will. And it made sense because they're sweet, and sugars tend to be sweet, and that's just where they go. And there's certainly.
Is this why foreign nations like Australia use like the kilojoules model?
No, it's just a different way of measuring it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's an example. It's that's not, I guess, the general purpose of our podcast today, but
I just wanted to open with some of that.
Yeah,
I'm helping establish your authority here.
Yeah, I think it's fun, but what it does do, it goes back to your original comment of 30 years later, what do we do?
Yeah.
And that's a good example. Like the dietary supplement industry has sort of changed. That's one way that it's changed. Originally when it was things like, vitamins, minerals, herbs, amino acids, we were talking about like, tryptophan, or, we were just talking about like milligram amounts of one amino acid that can be used to make, serotonin or something. Instead of, the sport nutrition products that are where you're doing 5 to 10 grams, of these calorie contributors. So it's citrulline is another good example.
Oh, yeah.
Citrulline has a caloric value to it, because it can convert to glutamine and
To glucose.
yeah, to what am I missing here? Not glutamine.
Talking about arginine.
Yeah, arginine.
Yep.
Yeah, and then be broken down. So it has a calorie content as well, and a lot of times that's overlooked, and then it's combined with malic acid or malate. So now you got 2 calorie contributors on there that. This is the kind of thing. And the only reason I like to that I do like to talk about it is because it is crosshair stuff for class action. And that's where the dietary supplement industry gets the biggest beating, and that's with lawsuits for, either, purposely misbranding products, or, maybe products that are, labeled with good intentions, but, regulatory ignorance. And I'd like to try
or even a lack of regulatory clarity. Like, just if I'm an asshole, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, look, we've done like
Plaintiff
over
lawyer.
1,000 labels.
Yeah.
And I didn't even necessarily
If
know
I wanted
that.
to pick on those guys and be like, well, I'm suing you because your calorie content is incorrect on here, and me and all my friends thought it was only 10 calories, and it turns out that it's 18.5, and you lied to us. Would I have a strong enough case, regardless of what the law is, because you have calories on there? It has a number, but everything in that tub you can light on fire and derive energy from, all the way down to like sucralose and ASK. And that's how you define calories. If you could light it on fire and it burns, it's going to provide energy.
Interesting.
So like, is that a weird way of regulation, or it's a vulnerability in the regulation because it's some sort of like enforcement activity through these class action lawsuits for laws that don't even exist on the books?
Yeah, calories, the FDA provides, recommendations by, estimating caloric content of a serving by different means, one of which is bomb calorimetry, others is, 4479, it's just, there's just different ways to do it. But I guess what they're not really saying is that, manufacturers, brands, and so forth should be utilizing the most appropriate method in order to estimate the caloric content of that food.
I would just use the published data because there's plenty of published data on the caloric value of aminos.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. So you were speaking earlier about like the 2,000 calorie diet and like how that could probably be somewhat amended based off of your daily recommended usage of protein.
Well, I think what we were talking about is, when you look at labels and we look at daily values as they apply to a 2,000 calorie, you always see that at the bottom, and the 2,000 calories was really targeting females, women of an adult age, and I think the men is 2,500. So what we were talking about with protein was really the RDAs, and whether or not, talking about something that really needs to be revisited, the RDAs are definitely an area that is ripe for, revisiting, and especially in the world of protein. And I'm hoping that we're going to spend the next hour just talking about protein, but
well, this is part of it. This is kind of where the people understand it from.
Yeah,
because like that one I just handed to you, that's a protein product. It's got 32 grams of protein, or 64% of the daily value. I mean, in our future world, where we're suddenly consuming appropriate base protein requirements, do you think that's only going to be 64% of your daily intake? 31 or 3 grams that's there?
No, I envision a world where we embrace the idea of requirements versus recommendations, where, we look at a lot of the information that is derived from, nitrogen balance and some of the other, classic historical data, and we're able to determine what a true requirement is. And a requirement means that it's adequate amount in order to maintain reasonable status for growth, development, and then also to not slip into signs and symptoms of deficiency. Okay. But it's not necessarily a recommendation for optimal performance at a given age or condition. And what that means is when we think about and just coming from a classic nutrition background, registered dietitian, the whole 9 yards, we always talked about the typical person, or the who is the typical person.
It's hard to put all humanity in one box.
It's just, it's almost nonsensical, and here's the reason why. That if you think about, the different buckets of individuals that protein requirements are actually elevated, that we don't give enough credit to, it would be during caloric restriction, weight management. It would be during healthy aging, okay, which is the fastest growing percentage of the population right now. It would be fitness. It would be sport performance. It would be, growth, pregnancy, lactation. And so the point is, once you start, sort of segregating people into these different buckets, what the typical person is, the normal person is very small. So we need to spend more time talking about these different conditions, situations, and applications, and talk about, why is it that, certain groups of professionals have clearly, identified that the true protein requirement for people of advancing age is probably double the RDA. Okay, why aren't we talking more about that? At the International Protein Board,
because they're sedentary. They don't stimulate their muscle mass, and muscle degeneration is like huge amongst that group because they're retired. They're at home, they're relaxing, and they don't want to do anything anymore. They forgot how to play.
But that should give them reason to need protein more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and physiologically, I mean, they're not as inclined to assimilation, meaning that, a gram, in your young years, a gram of dietary protein and the efficiency of conversion or assimilation into body protein is, let's say it's X. But as you advance, it's actually reduced, significantly reduced, and some of that is at the level of digestion, absorption, transport, tissue uptake, and then also the degree of stimulation on protein synthesis in tissue throughout the body. So, they actually need more. But what we tend to see when people get older is they tend to back off of protein.
Yeah, they don't need it.
Yeah, because they feel like that increases their risk of cardiovascular disease because their doctor is telling them no red meat, no eggs, so forth and so on. They're also trying to stave off, ongoing weight loss and body compositional changes, which is happening in their later decades of their lives, and also, maybe trying to control costs. Maybe they're on a fixed budget. So, the times in which, protein requirements are elevated for that group is actually a time where historically we see less consumption. So, I think that is worthy of more debate as a public health initiative. Certainly in weight management, we clearly know that as you reduce your calories, your percentage of protein as a contributor to the calories that you're still consuming, you will do better in weight loss if you have a higher protein percentage in there. But the old days where they would take the sort of the classic 12 to 15% protein and then 55% carbohydrate and 25 to 30 percent fat, and they would just reduce it down to 1,000 calories or 1,200 calories. So that would take protein way down. And going back to what we were saying earlier, that if we use a 2,000 calorie diet as sort of this threshold, and we develop, as we use it on packaging, and just say that that's, a target, the actual RDA for women, the absolute number, 46 grams, if you multiply that by 4, and then how many calories of that, you get from that as a percentage of the 2,000 calories, it's less than 10%. Really? So, that needs to be, because as part of, the general recommendations that go along with the RDAs out of the Institutes of Medicine and so forth, the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges, that was set at 10 to 35%. But yet we've got an RDA that's less than that. Mm-hmm. So, even the minimum of that range, we're less than that. And we get all hyped up, because, oh my gosh, if you're at if you're at double the RDA, that's when your bones fall apart, and that's when your kidneys, start to deteriorate. And
that
so
takes a lot of effort
to get to that level.
To get to that level, yeah.
You think so?
I mean, it really depends. You have a standard diet and like 3 or 4 protein shakes a day.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
but most people don't.
Most people don't.
Yeah, but if since eggs are back in fashion, so we can eat eggs in the morning again, and then if you have 4 or 5 ounces of meat and maybe some dairy at lunchtime, and then you have a dinner and so forth. I mean, it's pretty. You can get up over 100 grams.
But I hear this thing where it's like you need like 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, as far as like if you're training and everything. And one of the things that I hear from like a lot of people, unless they're constantly having whey protein farts, is that it's just really difficult to get a lot of that in.
I think sometimes, without supplementation, especially if they're trying to manage their caloric intake simultaneously because they're trying to lean and build at the same time, they may have those challenges, or the protein just is, it just takes up a high percentage of their total calories.
And I think there was another interesting thing that you said as far as like an older generation not consuming as much protein. That's one of the exact same things that Rick Kreider said, is whenever he was on here talking about creatine, and a lot of food derived creatine, and most people are deficient in creatine because they just don't consume enough protein.
Yeah, it's, because a lot of times when we think about protein and protein-rich foods,
Expensive.
It's expensive, but we're missing out on some of the other, gram-level nutrients, which are super cool, like, the carnitines and the creatines and so forth, that you're getting, naturally from the meat sources, and then, a nice selection of minerals. And so, and of course, you got your B12 in there. Sometimes we miss out and we get a little too hyper focused on just it being a protein delivery vehicle, and we miss out on some of the other, really cool nutrients, which are lifelong nutrients. A lot of us in the 90s, with EAS rolling out the first creatine product, I think it was called Phosphagen. Shout out to Anthony Almada. That's when we started supplementing with, and a lot of us have been supplementing creatine for like 3 decades, so we're in it to win it, and we'll continue on. So, I think that's one of the, I think that is a nutrient that we should be focused on starting early in life and going all the way through, advanced age.
So what are your thoughts on, like, when doing labeling, most supplements will recommend like no one under the age of 18 taking them, just as like a blanket liability statement?
I mean, we see whey protein interact with a lot of different levels of the life cycle, even though those products say that.
Right.
Yeah, there's, most companies will have their regulatory affairs people and their legal people and so forth. So, they like to use cautionary statements, as an adult, use this, blah, 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 not recommended for children, or keep out, whatever. And some of that is just liability. I think, in some ways we really do need to rethink how often we do apply that, because sometimes I think a consumer can look at that and just, think that it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And, but you're just not. Keep out of the hands of children. Why? What'll happen? Do they explode? I don't know. But it's just cautionary language that's applied a lot of times, to certain types of products. I tend to see it more with, thermogenic type products, weight loss oriented or positioned products, caffeinated products. That's where you tend to see it a lot more.
We see a lot of clients that just, if it's categorized as a dietary supplement, they just kind of want a blanket statement that just because it's a supplement. But there's plenty of supplements that kids can take. Like, there's a lot of clinical studies that say that protein is fine. Whey protein is fine for children to take. And there are whey protein products out there for children.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of them, like even like muscle milk for kids was a thing back in the day.
Yeah, I remember that.
But, whey protein exists almost ubiquitously throughout the entire food supply. And that was one of the things I kind of wanted to get into, is like infant formula is a huge source of whey protein, and especially like the alpha-lactalbumin, which is like a subset peptide within whey protein. That it affects infants, it affects adolescents, like, and it's used as like a texturizing agent in like macaroni and cheese. That it's all over the place, and they use the casein and those kinds of things. Anything that is like derived from milk, you're gonna find this stuff over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I think with good reason, because, as we were saying a little bit earlier, anytime we begin to have any conversations around whey, and then if there's, whey bashing that is happening, I'm going to, open up my shirt and, you're going to see the champion S right there, because, here we go. I always like to say that Mother Nature is, the world's greatest scientist, the universe's greatest scientist. I mean, so, she made whey, our first protein. Mother's milk right after colostrum is finished in the first couple of days, you transition into a whey heavy, early mother's milk. And, for good reason, because, it's very potent, has, high essential amino acid content. It clears the stomach very, very fast, and, growth and development is greater within that. I always like to, talk about this, especially with like athletes and so forth. I'm like, when was the most anabolic time in your life? And they're like, oh, I was in college that one year. I put on 20 pounds. I'm like, wrong. It was when you were an infant.
I said the same thing, because once upon a time I designed a whey protein blend based on infant formula. because there's not a time in your life when you're like doubling and tripling and growing like your entire body mass over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's where I found a lot of inspiration in infant formula. I took like the human milk oligosaccharides, the milk fat globule membranes, all those different little things, and like the whey to casein ratio that you find there. There's a lot of nuance in mammalian milk in general that we don't even fully understand yet.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's a great frontier for us, is just to keep on looking, different applications, different parts of the body as well. I think sometimes we get a little too hyper-focused on skeletal muscle because, we're animals, we like to look at ourselves in the mirror and we like to be big and strong and we like to perform and all that. But, milk is just it's a very complex delivery form of multiple nutrients that have multiple applications, throughout the body, and we were talking about this the other day because of, probiotics and, prebiotics and all that stuff. And they're like, well, what does the body do with lactose? Why do we become lactose intolerant? Why, whatever. Because it becomes a prebiotic. And
I was about to say, there's got to be some sort of microbiome shift that happens. I always talk about Mother Nature. I'm like, she doesn't play around. Like nothing goes to waste. There's a reason, unless it's a genetic anomaly that takes, there's a reason why we transition in, applications, physiology, and so forth as we grow and develop. And, once we started talking about, lactose as becoming a prebiotic, for certain probiotics in the gut microbiome, then it was just like, of course there's a purpose for it. And, that's super cool. Well, and like, especially the case of like lactobacillus producing lactose and using that lactose to feed other species that are also in the gut, that they thrive off of it. So like one man's trash is another man's treasure when it comes to the gut microbiome. And like, it's really hard to like demonize lactose in that sense because it's only a few steps from being lactate, and then it's going to be food for this other thing, which is gonna decrease all kinds of like fatigue. Like I was a huge fan of the new probiotic, the Vianella Atypica by FitBiomics. It entirely feeds on lactose and lactate and uses it in the gut, and it turns it into propionate and all these different other kinds of like short chain fatty acid fuels.
Yeah.
And you get a pretty decent buzz off of it.
Wow.
So I that's one of the weird things about lactose intolerance. And people say it gets them bloated and gives them gas, and it's like that is the microbiome responding.
Yeah, I mean it's that's the proof that that's happening.
So how did the IPB come about?
Oh, the International Protein Board. Those of us who have been in protein for a couple of decades, and so people. My wife always, hi Amber. My wife always says, Rob's favorite nutrients are in order. It goes protein, and then creatine, and then caffeine. Those are my three. So, we've been, protein fans. I've been protein fan for decades. I started taking, metrics when I was, a kid and all that. So being with brands and doing a lot of research with top researchers around the world, we just kind of got tired of sort of the articles that would come out about protein, higher protein intakes are destroying your kidneys. It's leaching calcium from your bone, and it's problematic. And then just not understanding like the application of protein, or if you take more than 25 grams of protein in a single serving, the rest of it is just wasted. You can only use 25 grams. That's it. That's what the research says. Mm-hmm. So, it was just kind of dealing with a lot of that, whether it's protein safety, how much protein you can use in one sitting, but also addressing, this idea of requirements versus recommendations, because what we do here in North America, I mean, we set our RDAs, but you can go around the world and, countries and regions have similar standards that have been set, and they're all right around at that same level. And some are a little bit better than ours, I would say. The Nords certainly, have recognized that, little bit higher levels, maybe 1 to 1.2 grams may be better for people as a general requirement. And that's the first push I've seen to go up, which makes me very happy because, at the IPB, we've made our recommendations for protein levels for different populations. And that's where we are as well, that, somewhere between 1 and 1.2 is just a base, good solid recommendation. And we overlook a lot too, in general, like, do the RDAs, would they even apply appropriately to vegans?
Yeah, I was going to ask that question. Like, what are your thoughts on like plant proteins and how does that affect the spectrum that you sort of overseeing in your?
Are you biased against vegan proteins?
Not at all.
Okay.
No, not at all. And I think they've come a long way, and it's been a lot of fun to watch development of plant proteins as an ingredient. And, certainly, I'm good friends with the folks up in Minnesota, Purists. They're wonderful.
They have a wonderful protein.
They do. Yeah. Hey, Tyler and Kush. And so they've gone really far, I think, in because there's always been a couple of issues with plant-based proteins. And I'm not talking about soy. I'm talking about the other ones with pea and, rice and so forth. So, there's functionality of it. How well does it do, in solution? Does it interact well with other components, so forth? They've smoothed it out. They've taken care of a lot of the taste components of it. And there's been a lot of push on digestibility as well, which is, certainly, been sort of a tough, thing that some plant proteins would have to overcome. So speaking of things that we need to probably revisit, concepts like PDCAS probably need.
Will you explain what that is and what it stands for?
It is protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. So what you're doing with PDCAS is you're looking at a protein and then you're breaking it apart into two principal components of how it would nourish the human body. So protein, how well is it digested? Collagen, just flat collagen is extremely poorly digested. Which is why it's always had like a PDCAS of 0, in just the collagen form. When you begin to hydrolyze it down into gelatins, it's a little bit better. But now these more advanced collagens that are more deeply hydrolyzed, the digestibility is a lot better, and you're getting you're going after more of the functional peptides. So the one part of it is how well is it digested? Okay, and then the other part of it is the amino acid score, and the amino acid score has everything to do with the essential amino acids, those 9 essential amino acids, and the level of the protein, the level of the amino acids, like milligrams of protein compared to milligrams of a standard level of protein, which is a requirement for that was set for the different essential amino acids based on requirements for a specific age period where growth is rapid. So, how well it does the essential amino acid levels in that protein stack up against that reference standard? Well, your animal proteins, the leucine, isoleucine, valine, tryptophan, methionine, so forth and so on, they're all above that threshold. So, the protein is said not to be limited in any way because all the essential amino acids are above. So the amino acid score would be excellent. But for plant proteins, they tend to be limited in at least one of the essential amino acids. Oftentimes it's a methionine or a lysine, where the level is below that reference standard. So that's the limiting amino acid. And so with that, your amino acid score is lower. So it's the digestibility, the protein digestibility corrected for the amino acid score. You take those two together and then you end up with a number which is topped off in PDCAS at 1. And then so all the, animal proteins tend to be at 1. And then, all the other proteins, can go underneath of it. So that's really what it is. Now, what that really means is, that can speak to, how, the value, the biological value, or the protein efficiency, like how well will that protein serve to build body protein? Or is it being limited because the amino acid composition isn't as good as other proteins, or the digestibility isn't as good as other proteins? And then we take that and we can use that to generate daily value. So, the daily value is based on 50 grams of protein. So if you have 1 gram of a complete protein, then that's, what does that calculate to? Like 2% daily value. So, but if your PD-Cas is below 1, then you have to correct your daily value. If you get 20 grams from let's say it's a limited protein, then you're not going to get the same, 40% daily value. It might be at 36, 32 or whatever.
So it's not like apples to apples.
No.
And that's why a lot of collagen's mislabeled. They label the entire thing as protein, even though the PD-Cas is really, really low and doesn't really translate.
Yeah, and it's and I've seen this a couple of times too. That
I think it's funny we kind of beat up on collagen a little bit more than we are vegan protein.
Yeah, but I think collagen has really found its home. As a dietary supplement, not a nutritional protein. And I think the way that we're thinking about collagen now is correct in that we're thinking about it not necessarily in the amino acids that it's delivering, but I think and total grams of protein. But in the pre-processing, the hydrolysis process, what kind of peptides are you generating? Because then it becomes more about, it being a delivery system for these functional peptides. If the body is well nourished, protein-wise, and you take a collagen peptide supplement, you shouldn't even really care that much about the individual amino acids because you've already got plenty in your diet. So, focusing on the individual amino acids isn't necessarily where we want to go with the collagen. Where we want to go with the collagen is really what are the milligram levels or gram levels of these functional peptide classifications, the dipeptides, the tripeptides, maybe 9 amino acids or less.
You mean the hydroxyprolyl peptides?
Yes.
So that's why you're seeing them more marketed towards like cartilage cells and things like hair, skin, nails, joints, stuff like that.
Yeah, you're able to start, with a type, and then you're able to hydrolyze that type down. And I guess the big question that we'll get to is to, how much does it really matter as, for the type? Because, in a collagen molecule, it's like every third amino acid is glycine. So you're always going to get a glycine if you're looking at just say tripeptides. You're always going to get glycine in there as like the first or last or whatever. And usually there's a hydroxylated amino acid in there as well in your short peptides. So I don't know. There's still so much that we need to really fully understand. And maybe maybe you can take a type 1 or 3 and hydroxylate it a certain way and have really outstanding results on joint tissue, where usually, we're hyper focused on like type 2 for joint. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to come down a lot to, how specific and how accurate we are in the hydrolysis process with collagen.
I think you're right about it not being a protein source, but as a dietary supplement, because I think that those peptides have some sort of signaling role that isn't really well identified yet. Yeah. And I don't know if it's positive or negative feedback, but logically you would think, okay, there's like spare body parts in the street kind of thing with these little dipeptides where it would just have a negative impact on the breakdown of those tissues.
Yeah, because, what we know now, and, I'll go back in time, when I was educated, we were taught that, protein is digested to amino acids. If you get short chain peptides, that they're just shimming between the tight junctions between enterocytes and, the body's just going to break them down because it doesn't know what to do with them. That's what we were taught. This is, just a few decades ago, but now we know that there's specific transporters for, peptides, and we know that there are certain peptides that are able to get in, and they're taken into fibroblasts, and that stimulates collagen production. And, so we're just really beginning to, understand the mechanisms. And that's where I think it's really going to get interesting. But going back to the previous point about collagen and PDCAS and all that, I've seen products where the brand will add some of the essential amino acids.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, so it's missing tryptophan. Tryptophan is a super big amino acid, and collagen fibrils are these tight little helical spirals. So you can't get big amino acids; they have to be smaller amino acids so it can spiral like that. So you don't get tryptophan in collagen, but you can't just add tryptophan and say, oh, now it's complete, because all that glycine and all those hydroxylated amino acids. Basically, it's almost impossible to add additional essential amino acids and make it a complete protein, because all the non-essential amino acids that are in there, are diluting out what amounts of the essential amino acids that are there to begin with. So it's a losing battle to try to make it a complete protein, and I would almost caution those brands that do it to think about their collagen differently. Think about it as the peptides and focus more on the physiological, benefit of the peptide, not as a nutritional protein by trying to say, oh, and it's a complete protein. So what? If you want, it's still not going to be anywhere near an animal protein in its essential amino acid content. It's still going to be like half the level of essential amino acids per gram.
Well, I think that's kind of funny because collagen is an odd exception to the rule, because on the PDCAS score, most of the animal proteins are so high, except for collagen, because it's not a complete protein, and it's going to be falling somewhere amongst the vegan proteins.
Yeah, it's pretty far down. Yeah, without a doubt.
Interesting. So, IPB doesn't discriminate whether it's whey from egg, from it's just protein.
Yeah, so we'll speak to different types of proteins, because that's an opportunity for education, and that's what this organization is about. It's about it's about education, and it's about hopefully creating. The way that we design a lot of our information is that it's sort of designed for, there's a quick takeaway, there's some media bites in there, what we'll call them protein bites, which is more media, friendly.
We're making some protein bites right now.
Yeah, there you go. And then there's more comprehensive, deep dive, sort of review and overview kind of stuff. And, we just want to we wanted to deal with some of the most important issues. And, just going back to where we began this conversation is, now's a really good time to go back and look at, the RDA levels for protein, because they are not, they're confusing. A lot of times people are misunderstanding them as that's their target, not necessarily a level of protein that can work best for them. And that's the difference between a requirement and a recommendation. A recommendation would be more, how much should you target in order to optimize whatever it is you're trying to do, whatever it is you're trying to become, and that's what a true recommendation is. And those protein levels are higher, just like in sports, with the IPB, we make higher protein recommendations for people who are just exercising, 1.2 to 1.6. And then, for people who are exercising aggressively, extreme muscle building, or even, who are training hard and cutting calories, at the same time, in order to help protect against loss of muscle mass, that's when you get up to 1.8 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. That's, these types of situations, they just elevate, protein requirements. So we're just trying to help people think differently. But it wasn't too long ago that, there were still arguments that, the RDA for protein was adequate for athletes. I mean, you only have to go back 25 years ago. So we've come a fairly long way. And I think really the future is, and we were talking about this before we began, is, where do we go from here? You know, is it just going to be more and more and more, or do we have to begin to really focus on, you know, how do we get more out of less, if you will, to make us more efficient, you know, so that we can maybe eat less protein, more strategically, focusing more on types, some of the fractions, some of the hydrolyzed peptides, and so forth. And I think that's where, you know, things may go in the future, but it'll be much more technical, and maybe AI will help drive us there.
There could be a conversation just about like supply and demand, whey protein, the availability of dairy, and like how that associates with cost and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the industry data, you know, protein is still, the king. You know, within sport and fitness, active nutrition category, it's still the biggest component, and whey protein is still sort of the king of the king. And whey protein isolate pricing is still going up. You know, I'm getting
within the last week.
Yeah, within the last week, you know, we're going to be in upwards of like $11 a pound, and just at container
Never before seen.
Unbelievable. And, you know, a lot of it's just demand.
That is like a promising thought, though, because the demand is so high right now that maybe we're moving away from those requirements and toward those recommendations in a positive migration in that direction. And that was going to be one of my questions, is how do we go from these basic requirements? And one of the things I found interesting about like your specific statement is the essential requirements for growth and development, which that is open to quite a bit of interpretation, but it does not say that it's the minimum required for survival, which is what I was afraid might be the case. That how do we move from that world where we're settling for just enough, and how do we get to that place of optimal? Because I think that's part of what the whole Make America Healthy Again thing's all about, or at least what it should be. I think half of it's all about like, let's just get all this junk out of our food supply. But I think that there needs to be that other spin. How do we go from just good enough to optimal?
Yeah, and you know, hopefully we'll be able to have those, you know, those bigger, better conversations and figure out how to do some of these things better, instead of, you know, and you know, I still don't think we've done a really good job in truly personalizing nutrition either. You know, and we still all work within the, you know, the same 200 milligrams of this or 150 milligrams of that, or, you know, 1.5 grams per kilogram of this. And you're like, for him and me, well, he's, you know, and it's just, I don't know, you know, I think that's a big opportunity. And again, I think that we're creating some of the tools that are hopefully going to help us, you know, understand how to do that better and more easily, because it's difficult. But, you know, and I still think there's a lot that we still haven't even truly gone deep enough. Like, we're just ankle deep in the waters of the microbiome, and how, you know, how that influences, you know, every other part of our body, including, you know, including our body composition. And, you know, I think that how do you optimize that so that maybe you're able to externally nourish better while you're internally nourishing through your microbiome? And, you know, it's just, you know, it has to be sort of this really comprehensive approach. And then from there, we have to be able to channel and filter so that it becomes much more individualized.
I think that
It's hard to do on a label when you're
it's gonna be. Yeah. But I mean, like, I don't think it's an insurmountable challenge. But what I think that is kind of needed right now is, in a policy kind of way, to take a look back on everything that's happened in the last 30 years and kind of be like, wow, look at how far we've come. And from like when we've set a lot of these different requirements that for the diet, that, you know, we did the best that we could at the time for the data that we had. But there's been a lot of data in the last 30 years, especially since this whole thing came into its infancy. The whole concept of probiotics in the microbiome wasn't even part of the original writing of Deshay. And I think that now that we're ankle deep, I mean, we've got a pretty good idea of where it's going, where I think that, you know, there is definitely need for an update. And there's definitely more of a a setting up of the platform of the ability to do personalized nutrition aside from men, women, or pregnant women or kids or infants. Like there needs to be more boxes than there has been previously.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
What is your take on like sort of like this David bar and things like that, where they're trying to get less calories for like with more protein content, but they're doing it with what's that ingredient they're using?
Well, they're using a clever fat, which doesn't fall into the traditional definitions of fats, and they're claiming that it is less than 9 calories per gram. Are you familiar with this protein bar that we're talking about? It's like the hottest protein bar.
Well, the David bar?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What's the fat?
I do not recall. I'll look it up really quickly.
Well, why I'm getting to this is the challenge that I see is we want to recommend more protein, right? We want people to have more protein.
And have clean macros.
Yeah, but protein just is getting more expensive and becoming more scarce. Not scarce, but the supply is not meeting the demand. So that issue comes to a head.
Yeah, I don't know if it's more protein, because I think that there are a lot of people that get plenty of protein in their diet, but they're not consuming it specifically or intentionally or strategically. They're just, like we were saying earlier, they wake up in the morning and they, maybe they're traveling and they go to the hotel buffet and they load up on the scrambled eggs and probably have a yogurt, maybe a chocolate milk or whatever. And before you know it, they're off and running at like 50 grams of protein for breakfast. And then there's a business lunch and then there's dinner and all that. So there's a significant portion. I think, the important thing is that, we begin to place greater value on protein and understand, that, when and how much and what types and how it can work for you best in, really sort of depending upon what your aspiration is, what you're looking to achieve, how it can work for you best. And, almost, to some degree, protein is different from carbohydrates and fats. Protein is structural and functional in your body. There is very little, 1% of your dietary, protein bucketed nitrogen is in the form of free amino acids that's going in and out of tissue and circulating in the blood. But by and large, 99% is, in the form of some kind of protein structure. So you can't say the same thing about carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is always in a state of, it's either immediately being used for energy or it's stored and ready to be used as energy. But very, very, very little body carbohydrate plays, a structural regulatory role or anything like that. I'm not dismissing like some of the, specialized fats and carbohydrates that you'd find in like, cellular membranes and so forth. But the fat, kind of follows the same pattern in that, there's regulatory fats and certainly, fats that are important, from structurally for, cell membranes and so forth. But in general, body fat, is stored energy that by and large is waiting to be used and maybe has some other roles like providing cushion, providing some insulation for, thermoregulation, that type of thing. Protein's not that way. It is valuable. So, I think we trivialize protein sometimes in that, this tastes great, love to throw meat on the grill, love my eggs, whatever, but we don't think enough about what that protein is doing for us and how we can best apply it. So I think it's not a matter of everybody needs more protein. I just think we need to understand protein more and how food protein can be, I always say your muscle is your biggest buddy throughout your life. Muscle does so much. And it's even beyond, physical movement. It is a major metabolic tissue. It's a major depot for fats and carbohydrate that you eat. It serves so many, roles. And, so protein is that macronutrient too. It is it's one of your most important molecules that we just slam down, the pie hole and don't think enough about it, and what it does for us. And maybe if we understood it a little bit more, maybe some people just get too much in the foods that they like to enjoy. Maybe some people don't get enough, but, I think we can all understand it a little bit better.
I'm going to call halftime on this We'll take a break and then we'll be back.
What's up, everyone? TK back here. I'm going to talk to you guys about the Suppworks podcast. For everyone that's been listening in since we started this thing in January, I just want you to know that we are so damn delighted to have you guys as listeners. The audience has grown, the engagement has grown, the viewerships have grown. It's been pretty wild to see. But with all this growth, it comes with quite a cost. And that's why the Suppworks podcast is looking for sponsors. Now, we have started off with some sponsors in the beginning, and they were great partners. But to be honest with you guys, I never really charged them because I didn't feel like our audience was large enough to basically pay for whatever cost I was having to expend in doing the podcast. And just so you guys know, these podcasts, they cost a lot of money. We got to fly someone in. We got to put them up in a hotel. We feed them. We usually take them out to some sort of event. It adds up. It costs quite a bit. And we subsidize these costs with sponsorships. So if you own a business, whether it's in manufacturing, you're a raw ingredient supplier, you own a brand, maybe you have some sort of supplement or CPG type service that applies to the supplement industry or the CPG industry as a whole, and you think that our audience, which is usually movers and shakers within the CPG industry, you're talking CEOs, owners of businesses, top sales executives, and then the whole gambit in between super users all the way up into founders of companies basically listen to our podcast. If you think that audience is for you and it would work for your business for us to advertise on this platform, hit us up. Just send us a DM. Send us an email, tk@nutrimedia.co, or send Joey a DM, and we can talk about our sponsorship packages. And basically, you get this. You get a 1-minute table read where we talk about your brand. And obviously, this has got to be something that we approve of and we support. But if there is a good partnership there, reach out. Maybe we'd be interested in having you as a sponsor. So if you want to sponsor the Suppworks podcast, just go and hit us up, and you can have your table read right in the middle of the podcast while we do our breaks, just like now. All right, and we're back. So I have a sort of a age-old question. When I was in customer service, I used to work at Nutravolt customer service, and people would ask me all the time, when should I take my protein shake? Do I take it before I work out? Do I take it after I work out? And then there would always be some guy that came in who's like a, bodybuilder or something like that, and clearly an expert in this subject would say, well, you take it now, and then you take it now, and then you take it then, and then they would have like a regimen of exactly of how it should be done. But I guess that's only specific towards somebody who's probably doing heavy volume, heavy weights. When is the best time to take a protein shake?
Well, I like how you set that up with the age-old question. So you ask the old guy in the room.
Well, you're the guy who would know.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are still confused to this day.
Yeah. So, really when it comes to protein, the sort of the layout is, or the way that I would say is like, well, when was your last meal and what was in that meal? So if you ate breakfast and let's say that you had a good protein source at that breakfast and then you go work out at 9 o'clock, then I would say that, it's okay for you certainly to wait until after you train, and then just, that's a good time to have it, and maybe even build a bridge to your next high protein meal. So, so I think it really comes down to what you were, what did you eat prior to that? I'll tell you, I used to work with swimmers, and they were really challenging because they would have to get in the pool at like 6 o'clock in the morning because that's when they would get pool space. And it was really difficult, for them and, to even get them to eat anything before they got in the water because it's just so early. Usually it was,
protein's heavy, you're in the water.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. Yeah. So if we could get anything into them, from a protein standpoint, it would be whey, but because it would clear the stomach a little bit more quickly, and I would be okay with lesser amounts, or even essential amino acids. I think was a pretty good way to get them trained. So and have them put a shaker cup next to their next to their bed and just add the water and shake it up, hit it, and so forth. But to go back to your question, if somebody has eaten within a couple of hours, 3 hours or less prior to that, then then they're probably fine not having the protein until after they train. If they're on an empty stomach and it's and even with like intermittent feeding, now, I always recommend that people train after they're fed. So you want to train in, sometime if you don't start eating until like 11 o'clock, then I'd encourage them to train in the afternoon. The last thing that I would, hope or not to see is that they train early in the morning and then they still go for another few hours without any type of even essential amino acids or even branch chain amino acids at that point, and try to talk them off the bridge and say supplementation isn't necessarily eating. But yeah, it really comes down to the timing of your previous meal as to how important it would be, to think about having a protein before you train. Just to get the amino acids coming in, just to reverse, sort of that overnight, shift between more breakdown versus building. But if you're training in the afternoon or you're training in the evening and you've been kind of eating throughout the day, I think it's almost moot.
So your muscles would require or demand those amino acids for the purpose of performance.
Yeah, well,
Endurance, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's when we can really begin to talk about timing. Is that when you train hard, you're really doing two things. Number one, you're stimulating muscle protein breakdown, but you're also stimulating muscle protein synthesis. So, as soon as you come out of that workout, those two are being ramped up on both sides of the balance, and you want to be able to serve. You want to be able to reduce the breakdown, which happens when you consume protein or amino acids are already present. It'll dampen that. So it sometimes it's one way to look at it is just simple algebra. I think the best course of action is, for people, what I always recommend is, start your day with protein, end your day with protein. Yeah. It should be part of your first meal, your last meal. And I'm not a huge fan on people training on an empty stomach. We've done some good work, in the past where we've sort of dispelled the idea of where you train on an empty stomach and you burn more fat.
Yeah, fasted training.
Fasted cardio. Yeah. And so what we were able to do is we were able to give people whey protein before they did their, extended cardiovascular exercise. And what we found is they still burned about the same amount of fat during that time.
Did they have any increased protein breakdown? That's what was interesting. What would be interesting to me.
Because of the cardio
and whatever kind of training.
Yeah. So, they would come in on an empty stomach, and then, they would have whey protein or not. And, so we weren't actually measuring to see how much of the protein was being, broken down. And they weren't really, because a lot of times fasted cardio, they're not really, the intensity isn't extremely high. They're just, they're taking it up, they're getting their heart rate up, over, like 120, 130, whatever. And they're just looking to burn extra calories, but they're not necessarily, training for endurance type of cycling or anything like that. So, but the point is, and we saw the same thing when we did the overnight protein studies as well, and we did a lot of work at, with Mike Ormsby's lab down at Florida State, go Noles, is that, when we gave them protein, casein protein before they went to bed, and we also, made some protein foods too, is that during the overnight period, and we're assuming that the benefits of the protein are there, especially, coupled with the research coming out of Luc Van Loon's lab, that showed that, when you're asleep, you still get the same protein response within the muscle. Like only your brain's asleep. The rest of the body's not sleeping. You're nourishing the same and so forth. But what we did find is that, you get a slight metabolic boost throughout the night. And then also when you measure the release of glycerol into the blood, which would be a marker of fat breakdown from fat tissue, the consumption of protein before you went to bed did not slow the breakdown of body fat while you slept. So there's something that's really kind of interesting with protein in that, it's just your body almost doesn't recognize it as a energy nutrient the same way it would recognize carbohydrate.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's a question I'm asking is like the response to that. Because people are like, when's the metabolic window? Should I take
the anabolic window?
Anabolic window, yeah. Or should I take a casein before bed? Is it better to take one that is a nighttime protein, something like that? You see it marketed that way, but like, is there any merit to any of that?
Well, I think the best way to think about it is, that when you train, you're stimulating the opportunity to build, new muscle protein. So, the exercise, the training is a stimulus, and it creates the opportunity. And then, but you need the building blocks, and you need, the extra, support, the stimulating support of the amino acids. So really, you want to be fed around that time of the workout, and you want to be in a well-nourished state for the hours that follow. But that window, is going to close very slowly, and there's, really nice research that was done years ago by Hackney and some others where they looked at, metabolic rate, 24 hours after a training session, and they were still finding that it's still, elevated, meaning that, the whole elevation of muscle protein synthesis, the idea that you walk out of the gym and you have results, that's not the case. No, it happens over a longer period of time. The most potent period of time is within the first few hours, which, gives us those classic bar charts that we see in papers and, the curves and whatnot, but it's still going on. So the idea of the metabolic window or the anabolic window is really the idea of 24 hours a day. Okay. It's just, are you going to get 80% out of your training, or are you going to get 90% out of your training? And so the idea of you want to maintain the delivery and the availability of building block amino acids and a positive, or, as positive as possible caloric state, metabolic state to support, an anabolic state, over that period of time. And I've worked with a lot of, professional athletes and so we'll come into combine season, NFL combine. So I'll work with Chip Smith Performance Systems and some others. And one of the tricks, or one of the things that we've had so much success with, is making sure that we would supplement them with casein before they went to bed. And where we would see it the most is in the stabilization or the improvement of body composition of a lot of these players. Because, a lot of times they get hyper-focused on, some of the old thinking that, I can't eat after dinner, or, if I eat before bed, it's all, it's going to convert to fat and so forth. And they're hyper-focused on body fat. It's unbelievable. You pull them off of DEXA, or you pull them off of like an InBody, and you're walking them through the data. They're like, well, what's my body fat percentage? I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about
lean body mass.
I want to talk about fat-free mass kilograms, because then we start playing around with, your ratio of fat-free mass to fat mass, because your fat-free mass is your performance mass. That's what makes you bigger, stronger, faster on the field, on the court, in the pool, wherever wherever you are. And that's, we had to get them thinking along those lines. But giving them casein before bed really kind of, because, the way it really kind of works in a way is, total protein over total time. So not necessarily how much are you getting at one specific meal, which maybe plays into more of that anabolic window. But what we've been able to see over the last, decade is that if your protein intake is high enough over the course of a 24-hour period, it sort of reduces the focus that we have to spend, in thinking about things like an anabolic window.
Right, yeah. So you should just you should have protein throughout the day, and then load up near when you're doing the most output.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I don't really recommend, and athletes would show up, at the training facilities, and that's one of my first questions: what'd you eat for breakfast?
Yeah.
What's in your belly right now? What's your pee look like? That type of thing. And, these are just basic questions.
So those are very important questions.
But are you recommending that they get the vast majority of their carbs earlier in the day and maybe less protein, and then as they go throughout the day, they kind of ramp up to more protein, less carbs?
No, so some of it has to do with, what they'll be doing functionally over the next hour to 7 hours. Because sometimes, they can be in a facility for like 6 hours. So, there's a mid-break in there that, but, so just getting, a small, protein and carbohydrate rich, meal for breakfast, is really important in sort of setting them up. I always focus on, hydrate, fuel, and build. So, a lot of times, even, like you have some of the leaner position athletes, they're carb haters to some degree.
They want to see those abs.
Yeah, and it's just like, well, you know what? I mean, if you want to lean out, I'll tell you, the training that you do with the strength and conditioning coaches is going to take care of that.
Yeah.
But you're going to have your best workouts, which are going to have the best results if you are carb ready. So, if you have to carb to power, your performance, so that the performance, the volume of training and the type of training that you're doing is going to have a bigger impact on how your body looks and how it performs than trying to eliminate, 25, 50 grams of carbohydrate from your diet because, your girlfriend says that you're starting to look a little punchy. Yeah. So, yeah. So, that's just it. I mean, the high performance athletes are just different. They just are. And, so we have to wring out every opportunity throughout the day. And that, that nighttime period before bed, has really paid off big for, a lot of these guys that are trying to build muscle and lean out while they're, in a condensed period of time, in an off-season period of time, such as, when working with like NFL combine athletes who are getting ready for the combine in Indianapolis, end of February, beginning of March, or their pro days. Coming out of their bowl games and whatnot, it's a tight window. So that we have to eke, like every hour is important from a training standpoint.
Yeah.
And
they're trying to look at their best for basically 1 week.
Yeah. And it really makes a big difference.
Do you think in your research that it's probably more fun to work with like pro athletes because their bodies will respond to perturbations like a lot more readily than say like doing a study on like,
You probably just get more data.
People that are like on Ozempic or something that are largely, sedentary? Or do you think like both of those populations would probably respond well to like before bed casein?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too.
Well, I think, the before bed casein is your best responders are going to be those that, the skeletal muscle is metabolically stimulated through, hard training throughout the day. So, during that time, I mean, if they quit at say 4 o'clock in the afternoon and they're going to bed at 10 o'clock, that's only 6 hours later. So, they're, and even going back to, the academic studies and you pour through a paper, they're looking at 4 hours, and after 4 hours, they still have, significant amounts of, muscle protein synthesis and all that stuff. So, and it's, it's sort of going down a little bit, but, that bedtime period is still recovery and building period for, for their muscle.
And miss those 8 hours.
Yeah, it's, and again, I'll make the point that, sometimes bedtime is, it's not recognized, but it has to be, just because, your brain is, you're not alert, you're not awake. The rest of the body is, it's breathing, it's forming urine, it's, the hormones are changing and, things are happening at night. And if you consume something, digestion and absorption happens with the same degree of efficiency and the same processes as it would be if you're awake.
Would you say that protocol still exists with grandma, who wants to take it at night and not have muscle degeneration over her sleep if she doesn't have a high protein diet? Yeah,
I think, I what it really does is, let's go back to what we were saying earlier about, how important it is to get a total threshold protein for grandma.
Right.
And let's say that, we're beginning to realize that the RDA is not enough for her and that maybe she should be somewhere around 1.2, 1.4 grams per kilogram. But she doesn't like to eat a lot. She'll have a piece of toast and some tea or whatever.
But she'll slam a 70-gram casein shake before bed.
But what it does, it does open.
You sleep real good.
It opens up that extra 8 hours in the day. Uh-huh. So if you can get her to consume a small meal, maybe it's some yogurt or maybe some cottage cheese or something like that before bed, that may pay off.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about how well I could juice this casein before bed thing.
Yeah, well, like pregnant mothers, for example, there's a lot going on metabolically.
Oh, yeah.
In their sleep, they use a lot of nutrients. So like
Them doing casein before bed will grow a baby faster, potentially.
I'm just wondering, if like that case could be made. Same thing with like creatine and then like brain development for children. Like there's just a lot of things that like protein for bed. Casein, I guess it's just because it's a slower digesting, right?
That's usually why it's targeted, because the nighttime period is 8 hours, and the idea is, but I've seen a fair amount where there's practices where they blend whey and casein. So now you're kind of getting closer to milk, something that would be like a milk base. I think that's. But yeah, the idea of the casein was slower digesting, longer periods in which the amino acids are able to absorb into the bloodstream and take up more of that 8-hour period.
So when it comes to these different proteins, like, can you help for the audience like differentiate whey from casein from milk or
isolate and
concentrates, and like kind of like identify what the different proteins are?
Well, we know that isolate's the most expensive.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Well, and so there's a lot of different proteins that are available to us, and so if we're talking supplementation, we're focusing mainly on that. But you're talking about going from food to, something that might be, ready to drink or powder or something like that. So, your milk-based proteins are going to be your whey, and it's going to be your casein. Those are the two main families within the milk protein. Milk itself is about 80% casein and about 20% whey. And so, both whey and casein actually break down into subfractional protein families as well, and then there's even smaller. So they're very complex. Whey and casein are a little bit different in that, the primary difference is really speed in which they're digested and absorbed. And the speed at which a protein is digested, a lot of it, like the overwhelming amount of it, is how quickly does it clear the stomach. The stomach is the depot, the protein will drop in, and then at the base of the stomach is a little ring. It's a muscular ring called the pyloric sphincter. The stomach is like a big butter churn in there, so it's squeezing, and then just small amounts spurt out, every minute. So, like every 15 to 20 seconds, there's a spurt, and it just goes into the small intestine, and then the contents, which would have the protein in it, get assaulted by digestive enzymes, which break it down primarily into amino acids and a smaller amount of short chain peptides. Whey loves acid. It just loves it. Does the backstroke in acid. It just loves it. And the stomach is a vat of acid. Hydrochloric acid primarily gets oozed in there from the walls of the stomach. And, the acid is there really to do a few things, but the primary thing that it'll do is it denatures protein to make it easier for protein to be digested by digestive enzymes. Plus, it also kills, a lot of, foreign stuff that maybe, need to be deactivated. So, the pH of the stomach is, pretty low during digestion, somewhere in the upper 2s to the mid 3s. And so, whey really does well in acid. So when the stomach is spurting, it just spurts out in the small intestine faster than any other protein. So when it comes to how quickly the amino acids from whey protein begin to show up in the blood, it's the fastest because it clears the stomach the fastest. Casein, on the other hand, doesn't do well in acid. And if you think about how we make cheese, we expose cheese to acid and enzyme, and then the casein in the milk curds up, and then we take a cheesecloth and we just squeeze it out, and all that watery stuff runs out, and that's the whey fraction. The rest that's left over is primarily the casein, which then becomes the cheese. So casein doesn't do well in stomach acid. It curds and gels up. So it takes longer for it to make its way through the stomach. So it's much slower through the stomach, which is why the amino acids show up a little bit more slowly in the blood, and why they show up in the blood longer than whey. Whey's if you do a 25-gram protein kind of thing, it's, your blood amino acid levels are going back to where they started out within the first 3.5 hours. Casein, if it's like a micellar casein form, then that same 25 grams of protein, you'd still see amino acids coming into the blood after like 5 hours.
But it's like the same content of amino acids and proteins.
They're very, very, very similar. Both have very high essential amino acid content, and within the essential amino acids, we always like to, look at the branched chain amino acids. So very, very similar from an essential amino acid content.
I was wanting to ask this earlier, but I didn't. But as compared to vegan proteins, do you think that there is a reason why plants, or I guess in that sense, like their seeds, don't contain a lot of these essential amino acids? Is it like a structural supply and demand kind of thing, where we have these beautiful, more ornate types of proteins with all these different functions, and they're just trying to form tight little helixes like collagen?
Well, plants don't have muscles.
Plants don't have muscles, but you have to. I think of
Cows do. Cows got big muscles.
A more fair comparison would be to compare like a seed to an egg, because there's instructions for an entire plant in that seed.
Yeah. So, the big thing is, plants and animals are just different, as kind of was alluded to there. So plants are really good at making complex carbohydrates, which is why, they build fibers and, other structural molecules that are, based on carbohydrate. They're just really good at building it because they're really, good at building carbohydrate, based upon.
That's their predominant structure, not muscle.
That's right. Whereas, animals, as we said earlier, protein is structure and function, and not as much for plants. So, what the seed will have is, just enough for the seed to begin to germinate and to begin to grow. And so, a lot of that oil will function as early energy and so forth. But, there's just not a lot of protein in there, and at all.
Good for fiber, though.
Yeah.
Good for poops.
Good for poops, indeed. But it just a plant and plant proteins. They're just different. But I'll tell you what really fascinates. This is what fascinates me, is you take some of the largest land mammals, and they're herbivores, and all they eat is grass, or
like no protein,
or leaves, or whatever, and they become some of the highest, muscular, behemoth animals, rhinos and hippos and
elephants,
elephants and giraffes and all this, and they're herbivores. And then even the cow is a massive protein producer when it primarily eats grass. So this takes us back to how important the gut biota is, and what we still need to understand there about what they're doing in order to generate.
They also eat massive amounts of it. So their overall induction is
all day,
more,
all day.
So like, let's say you have an athlete at these combines that you're training, and they're vegan. Do they have to increase their vegan protein?
Have you ever had this problem?
Yeah, so I get asked that question. I tend to find that somewhere around 6 to 8% of each class will say that they're vegan or pescatarian. But yeah, there's a fair amount of plant vegan based athletes that we do.
Is the recommendation that they just consume more?
It's a little bit more, but not a lot. But yeah, it's a little bit more. So if it's 30 grams of, say, a whey for for an omnivorous athlete, it's it may be like 35. But by and large, it's going to be based upon their body weight and their training and so forth. But yeah, it can be a little bit more.
Okay. You want to get into the products, or you want to get into the bits?
I was just calculating the average protein intake for a rhino. I read that they consume 25 kgs per day of grass. And I asked ChatGPT, I was like, what's the average protein content of grass? And it said, well, first of all, it went into the many different kinds of grass, but I specifically asked him, like, hay. And it was about 14%. So for every 25 kgs, they're getting 3.5 of total protein intake, which that's a lot.
Well, how many kgs do they have a day?
25.
That's it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot, but I mean...
That is a lot. I mean,
you'd think it'd be a lot more if they needed that much protein intake.
That's still a lot of protein. That's almost 4 kilos a day.
How many grams of protein is that?
3,500.
Okay. What percentage is that to weight?
It's 14.
So it's similar.
Well, to their weight, I don't know. How much does an average rhino weigh? Over a ton. But all right, so are we going to correct this? So per pound of body weight, let's just say a rhino weighs a ton. They're getting in 3,500. Are they?
So you would think that their percentage of protein is way less in order to put on that much mass. Like that's crazy.
Well, I'm just dumbfounded.
They're getting like half a gram of protein per pound of per pound of body weight. If they're only eating 25 kgs of hay.
25 kgs. And they're getting half a gram.
Assuming they weigh 2,000 pounds, they get 3,500 grams of protein. So that it comes to about 0.6 grams of protein per pound of body weight for a rhino. That's just chilling. That's probably a zoo kept rhino. That's not a wild rhino.
No.
I bet a wild rhino consumes way more than that.
Yeah, I'd hope so.
More competitive out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to perform more on the savannah than you do at the zoo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's just wild how big and muscular they can get with that.
Yeah.
That percentage ratio when you compare it to humans.
Yeah, and then especially with like a dairy cow, how much they'll produce from a milk standpoint, or even chickens and how much eggs they'll produce.
Yeah.
I mean, they're cranking out like high protein foods.
Mm-hmm.
Chicken egg is about 8 grams of protein coming from God knows how many grams of seed and feed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now I have to think about that.
How do they make that?
What, the seed and the feed?
Well, the protein to the egg. Like, what creates that?
The solvae coagula, protein in to protein out. This is one of the things like I thought, like a lot of our conversations are really neat. And for people who have like never thought of protein in this kind of a context before, I'm sure it's a pretty interesting show to watch. Have you ever thought about...
It's like fractional banking.
That's what our show is exactly like. Have you ever thought about like doing some sort of like an educational program for like freshman athletes who are in their first year of freshman biology? And I feel like there's so many kids that are taking freshman biology where a lot of these concepts just are kind of lost on them. But if they're athletes, you can kind of teach them about this kind of thing through this mechanism of supplementation. Have you ever given any thought to do anything like that?
I feel like we probably do that to some degree, because usually, the whole class, or just a few sessions.
I don't even know, or like something that the IPB could do.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a lot of fun. But usually, when we bring in the new athletes and new classes and so forth, we do spend educational time with them to help them understand what they're what's being offered to them, why we're doing it, because we do want to get buy-in from these guys for sure. We want to make sure they understand, they know why. Because a lot of it is different. And I'll tell you the other thing too is, a lot of these guys will come into some of these facilities and, they're coming out of programs where they're not given the best advice when it comes to dietary supplements, even something like creatine. I would say that there's probably about half of the players that come in don't supplement with creatine and haven't supplemented with creatine all the way through their high school and their college years. So, and the most common, thing that they say is, my coach told me not to, they said, don't do it. You don't know what's in there. So I think there's, really big opportunity to educate not just these young players, but also continue to educate, coaches and strength and conditioning coaches and so forth, so that they can understand how to make the best choices. There are limitations into what, teams can provide at the collegiate level. Yeah. So things like, creatine, they can't, but that doesn't mean that,
Is it like a WADA thing?
Yeah. No, it's not a WADA thing. It's the NCAA thing.
Oh, okay.
They're not allowed to provide certain supplements to their athletes.
But they can provide protein.
Protein they can, but things like creatine, amino acids, that type of thing they cannot.
That's weird.
Why do you think that that's the case?
It's probably just because the distrust of the manufacturing.
I think some of it is just either they don't want to have to deal with it, and liability. There's probably a bunch of different things. But I think at one time, and I'm not sure if protein.
You don't think it's the ethical acceptability of such things? You think it's a bunch of other proximal reasons?
Legal brouhaha.
Yeah, I think it's more of that. To be honest, I think it's a lot to manage. And I think they may view it as Pandora's box, that once you open it up, and then before you know it, you've got the players bringing stuff in. Hey, coach, is this okay? Is this okay? And I think it just gets, it can become problematic and distracting. I think what is going to get interesting is with like NLA and IL stuff and endorsements and so forth. So we'll just have to see where that all sort of shakes out.
I've heard rumblings of all sorts of stuff going on with that lately.
Yeah. Huge opportunity for brands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So do we want to take a dive into a product review, because you've so generously brought out your Core Culture WPI birthday cake?
I did not. Ed did. This is just the freshest thing that we have here.
I mean, you guys had a birthday cake over at Dymatize.
We did. Yeah, we had a birthday cake.
It's been a hot minute since I've had any birthday cake protein.
What did you do, like with Dymatize and these other large brands? Are you helping them with their R&D or their research specifically?
Yeah, so it was mostly product development, R&D oversight. We built the labs. We had fully functioning R&D labs, so we did all of our flavor work. We built out a lot of our own products, everything from powders and then other formulations, BCAAs, EAAs, pre-workouts, and all that we could make in-house on the bench, and then we could do. We can do testing, we can do sensory trials and so forth, just to make sure that it tastes as good as it possibly can.
Now, was Premier a part of that group before or after the merger with Post?
No, Premier was there first.
Okay.
And then Dymatize, Power Bar, then that became like its little spin-off entity about a year and a half after, and that was called Bell Ring Brands.
Yeah. Is that still its own thing, or is that still or is that under Post?
No, Post. Post is a significant shareholder.
Okay.
So they still have some involvement, but in general, they're sort of an independent, publicly traded entity.
Do they do all the international stuff too?
You mean Dymatize? And so Premier does some international distribution. Dymatize does, and Power Bar does too.
Power Bar's got a gummy I'm particularly fascinated with.
Are you?
They released a 9-gram gummy, which is a big gummy.
It's a big gummy.
It is 2 layers. So it's got a marshmallow layer, it's got a gelatin gummy layer, and in the center of the core, it has like this gooey kind of like a gusher, you get into it and it's got like this gel that's on the inside. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was the most mind-blowing, multi-dimensional gummy experience that anyone could ever have.
Oh, I tried that. That was good.
Yeah, the Power Chews. There's a ton of carbs. They'll spike your sugar like you wouldn't believe.
Well, I mean, Power Bar was really interesting because, the European side of that business was very endurance driven.
Yes.
They had relationships with the Tour de France, and they were a big sponsor there. And then Power Bar USA was more, driven towards just bars, like generic bars and so forth. And the bar space is very crowded. It's tough. Not as, it was a lot tougher. The bar space was a lot hotter than it is now, but it's still, fairly crowded space.
I think there's a bunch of innovation going on over there in the bar space.
So this is naturally sweetened sucralose. Oh, stevia, sorry.
Stevia?
Stevia, yeah.
Tastes like a birthday.
This is made in-house. I don't think we use like a flavor house or anything like that for this one.
It's not bad. You got a little guar gum in there for the mouthfeel.
Yep.
1 gram of carbs, half a gram of sugar, 25 grams of protein. The thing about this brand, they keep it very simple.
Yeah, like try and keep it under like 5. Like the amount of ingredients you can kind of like count on one hand. Words you can pronounce.
Clean label. It's very trendy.
I don't think I would play with any of the sweetener on here. It's plenty sweet.
Yeah, it's tasty. That's for sure.
Did you do anything different?
Probably just dial up the birthday cake a little.
We've gone back and forth about should we switch to WPC 90
For economic purposes?
for economic purposes. Yeah, but we feel like it's part of the brand's value system to kind of just give the customer what it is that they're buying, which is protein.
That's what people want. What does that retail for how many servings?
25 servings, $64.99 MAP, but like $59.99. Kind of see it sometimes in GNCs.
Rob, do you remember like 20 years ago when whey protein isolate was like $65 for like a 5-pound?
Yeah.
Top shelf of GNC, and that was a bargain. Well, I mean, no, people were still thinking it was expensive because like back then, like everything was cheaper, but still $65 for a WPI 5-pound was still like, if you're getting that, you're getting the good stuff.
Oh, yeah. I remember that, and just kind of just talking about how big of a difference it was if you could shave off like $4, off the price or something like that. How big of a difference that would make, but I remember when we were kind of freaking out when WPI went up to like $5 a pound, and they're like, what do we do? What do we do? And now it's just it's a complete runaway train. It's just gone off the rails to some degree. But hopefully the pendulum will swing backwards a little bit. But I think we were talking about a little bit earlier, like what would that take?
During the break.
Yeah.
Is it more cows? You just need more cows?
More cows, more processing, the plants that produce the WPI. But, I think that there's not only is the demand high here, but, the demand is growing internationally as well. So, I think some of what we're seeing from a mismatch between supply and demand and the high pricing is because, a fair amount's going abroad.
Do you think that actually allows like the precision fermentation companies like Perfect Day, who are creating like beta-lactoglobulin, which is like one of the predominant whey peptides from yeast? Do you think that gives them some sort of a window of hope to catch a foothold in the industry?
I think if they're able to do it at a competitive price or lower, that's I reviewed that type of innovation at SANS, Sport and Active Nutrition, the Nutri-Ingredients, which happens in February, which is moving this year. By the way, we're going to Torrey Pines. So
nice! I love Torrey Pines.
Yeah, it's going to be
San
pretty
Diego.
Cool. Yeah, but I think the concept is intriguing. I love the way that we're sort of thinking about how to do what we do, but maybe do it in a different way. And I always think too, like if we really plan on colonizing, other planets or whatever we plan on doing,
Cows can't come with us.
Cows aren't going, unless we can teach them how to fly.
That's why I was asking about that David Barr thing earlier, is because like you need to condense, you need more protein for less
space.
Yes.
Yeah. So, that would be one mechanism in which, you could generate a protein supply is,
Precision fermentation.
Yeah.
And that would potentially be space ready, as long as there's gravity where you're going. I have no idea how you would manufacture whey protein in zero gravity. That's actually kind of compelling to think about.
How do you shake it?
These shaker cups, let me tell you, it's going to be great. The powder won't go anywhere. No, well, the precision fermentation BLG is something that I've seen coming up, and like I even played with the perfect day material. It's not bad, But I was playing with it back in 2020, 2021, and back then it was like $20 a kilo, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this, boys. It's pretty expensive.
Come to think of it, the plants are probably loving it. The higher price, right? Like the aggregators, guys like Actus and all that, like they're winning.
But none of their customers are happy.
No.
Like maybe behind closed doors they might be, but at the same time they've got to deal with the fallout from Diamantizes, from Premier Proteins, from all these different people.
Glambia's like that. I mean, the way that I see it, the way that it's headed, that you're going to have like a big four, and they're just going to run everything, and there's not really going to be any margin for smaller brands to exist.
Yeah, I continue to be amazed that some of the rules of elasticity, from an economic standpoint, don't necessarily apply as much to WPI. That it's a loyal consumer out there that wants WPI, and so the demand stays pretty high. The way that brands tend to try to deal with the higher pricing of whey protein isolate is they're just producing units that have lesser number of servings, so they're trying to hold a price line with less product, and the consumers are they're not happy about it, but they're not bouncing off.
They're not going away.
They're not going away, and that's a really interesting thing, because you also brought the point up, like what is it about like WPC 80? Why, it doesn't have like the traction? Like, why isn't it getting more of the fallout, of the consumer? Like, that's it. I'm not paying this much for WPI. I'm going down to 80. And, the exodus isn't there. It's.
Well, like we were just talking about earlier, I was like, remember 20 years ago when you could get whey protein isolate in a 5-pound for like $64.99. If that's $59.99 for a 2-pound,
that's $64.99.
They're not going away.
No, they're not going away. And the difference between a WPC and a WPI isn't really that much. So it's it doesn't have as deep a filtration, so it's going to hold on to a little bit of the extra lipid and a little bit of the carbohydrate. But that amount is nominal. It's really I think by the time somebody shakes up, drinks it, walks down the hall, and, gets in his car, drives away, he's already burned through those additional calories or whatever. But, for whatever reason, it's just those little numbers on the nutrition facts panel that people really, they don't want.
They cling to that. Yeah. It's almost like a race to the top. It's not even like a race to the bottom. It's like they're trying to make it more expensive. Are we going to do some that's bullshit?
Yeah. So I've got a couple of them that are protein adjacent.
So this is a bit that we do.
These are some that have triggered me in the past.
I
don't know if you worked with any of these guys, so if you do, I apologize.
We try and find things that people say on the internet and either debunk.
Did you find TikToks for these?
Yeah.
Okay. You got to get rid of this software update.
Yeah, I've tried to for years.
You could just download it.
I do.
Oh.
It comes back like every week. They be updating.
Connected to the Apple TV.
Yeah, the internet says wild things. So we try and make light humor of that and then try and educate in the process.
This is fun.
Oh, there's been some fun ones, especially when they get into the, There's been some interesting ones.
Did you do this with Rick Kreider?
Yeah. We
Yeah.
did creatine ones, yeah.
He loved busting creatine myths. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
There's so many.
Well, there were a few of them that were legit, though.
Yeah. But I mean, like, there's people, pushing one form of creatine. Well, this doesn't give me stomach distress, and that whole myth has been dispelled. Like, whether it's monohydrate or whether it's anything, like, that stomach distress is very rare. You're there. All right. This stuff. Have you seen this before?
Shoot.
That's nice.
Bunch of ketones.
I got your back, dog. I'm right here.
Nice.
All right, you going to play one of these?
I got this. Go and play it.
Oh, there's Jacob Davis busting it. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so try the middle one. Try the middle one. Is this guy even going to talk about it?
Well, read it since it's subtitled.
Click the more on the description. Okay, we've got, all right, hunt for the perfect protein. We've got it right here. It's Gene Protein. Fitness enthusiast and athlete, just someone who loves it, yada, yada, yada. There's more to this.
Explain the video, Joey.
So they're just drinking this protein and having a good time. It's like a drug commercial almost. But no, there's more. Go back to the videos.
Oh boy, Gene Pro. Let's talk about this one. The short and sweet answer is this is a scam. We're typically asked about Gene
Thank
Pro
you, Jacob.
once a year or so, and every single time I am blown away by the fact that they can still legally get away with selling this essential amino acid product and calling it protein. No, I mean seriously, looking at the label, we'll see 7.2 grams per scoop, only 58.7 calories, and somehow they are claiming 30 grams of protein. The FDA requirement for protein is 4 calories per gram.
We
Now, that
open up
doesn't
another
always
tab
mean
and
that
just pull up
each
the
gram
product.
of protein or source of protein.
They claim a lot of miraculous things, and there's nothing that excites me more in this industry when people are claiming that they've got clinically substantiated, doctor-approved, miraculous results. So they're calling it a scientifically backed protein. But if you look at this thing and go to the back of it, what's in it? Oh, wait, they've changed it. Did they finally get enough? Okay, this is
Protein 7.5 equivalent to 30 grams protein in clinical studies.
okay, but it is generation 4. One of the things that are on here that I've not seen before in previous versions of this product are the NiPro, the protein isolate, the pea protein, the rice, and the mung bean. It used to just be leucine, lysine, threonine, and methionine. Just those 4 amino acids and less than 7.5 grams. And these guys have constantly claimed 30 grams of protein.
Where are they getting that from, Joey?
I don't know. All right, so scroll down. Scientific backing.
Well, it has on the top right there, no amino spiking at the top.
Increased absorption is backed by over 50 published clinical trials and research studies.
I guess they're getting it from the IO.
Now they're... So this is IO NiPro. Go back. All right, that's another thing about like the ingredient optimized technology of using like high frequency plasma to increase bioavailability of whey proteins.
Have you heard of this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That one I'm not too sure about either.
So can I just make a point?
Yeah.
And this is like a general point. Because I see this with a couple of different things where, in a study where they look at the rise and the level of amino acids in the blood after the consumption of either amino acids or protein. And the general assumption is as follows. If the level in the blood elevates higher and it stays elevated longer than the compared protein, and let's say it's the same protein, it's just been processed a certain way, where does that come from?
You would think like the conservation of mass would kind of like dictate it's only going to be a certain amount.
But I've seen where, and this goes back to whey bashing too, like it's 40% better than whey in amino acid availability or something like that. And, it just raises 2 points. Number one is, how is that possible? But the other point is, the assumption is that, bioavailability is really not necessarily, how much and how long it's in the blood. It is how much is getting into tissue and is available for the metabolic processes within that tissue. That's true bioavailability. Just because you get something into the blood, one possibility is that it's not leaving the blood. So it's not getting into tissue. So I always ask that question when I see like, these bar charts and everything of these types, of products that have been specially processed so that digestibility is better or bioavailability is better or something like that. I'm like, well, how do you know it's just not getting into the tissue?
They probably don't know.
We're having a hard time finding the original Gene Pro. I'm shocked. I feel like something did change. However, I still don't feel like they're getting 30 grams of protein out of a 7.5 gram scoop.
Well, is it? Are they saying that's the equivalency of a 30 gram?
Go back to the video that Jacob was doing and see what he says about the rest of it.
Protein contains a true 4 calories, but on average, we have to take that into account. If this really has 30 grams worth of protein in it, we would have a yield of 120 calories, right? Not only does this product break the laws of physics itself by claiming that something has a higher weight value than its actual containment, they also use a reference point for their 30 grams of protein, sourcing us to a clinical trial that they funded. The company itself funded this trial. So there's already implicit bias for this product to be deemed as effective. I've actually been sued over this and failed to reply in regards to the FDA's requirements for them to change the label. Even if we play devil's advocate and pretend that this trial was not funded by the company that makes Gene Pro itself, that's because a combination or formulation of whey protein and essential amino acids seems to absorb somehow more efficiently than the most bioavailable source of protein in the world. You still can't legally claim that there's 30 full grams of protein in it. Not to mention that the founder of this company is also the inventor of this, the X3 bar, claiming that you can generate more muscle hypertrophy than lifting free weights. Yeah, he totally got that jacked from lifting a rubber band bar. And while I commend him for having a legitimate background in biomedical research, that credential and that experience should not be carried over into things like nutraceuticals. Because it's obvious when you hear the way that he talks about his formulations, he has absolutely no clue how protein actually works. Oh.
Wow, Jacob.
That's fun.
Jacob loves doing good takedowns like that.
He owns a store in South Carolina. Yeah.
2021.
Which one from 2020?
This one.
Oh, goodness. What are they saying?
She can get a taste.
This is just someone making some shit.
What it taste?
Oh, it's some juice. Okay.
Supplements are not a magic pill or powder to help you reach your fitness goals, but they can help a lot, especially if you enjoy it. So, if you've been looking for an unflavored protein powder, try Gene Pro. It's easy to mix it with anything on the go. You can even mix it with protein pancakes at your house.
That's just an ad. That's just an influencer ad.
Well, at least they're reaching the TikTokers.
Yes. So, is it possible to get 30 grams of protein and 7.5?
Can you put 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag?
I guess not. I mean, they're using the IO, the ingredient optimized.
It doesn't matter. Still, it's a 7.5 gram serving size, and you're claiming 30 grams of protein. That just does not compute. Doesn't even pass the initial sniff test. There's another brand that claims a very similar
So you're
thing.
just saying it's just flat out mislabeled.
It's just it's misleading in the way that it is labeled.
It's true. It's true.
How did you get that effect on your voice?
It's pretty fun, isn't it?
You turned Dr. Robert Wildman into a demon.
Oh, that was great.
Still like that.
Yeah, it's still like that. Yes.
Is it?
Sing us a song so we can figure this out.
He's like afraid to talk now.
Check 1, 2.
Oh, he's back.
He's
He's
back.
back.
I kind of liked it though.
That was pretty exciting.
There you go.
All right, the second one is
Well, just to put a bow on that. I mean, the way that you would, the way that the industry, sort of the standard is to determine protein content is by way of nitrogen analysis. So you would take per grams, you take your serving size, which is 7.5 grams, and then you would it would be broken down, and then the amount of nitrogen that is in there. is then sort of you apply a factor against it based upon the type of protein it is, and then that would predict how much or estimate how much total grams of protein you have. So the point is that, I don't know how you would, unless they're adding straight nitrogen in it.
Well, this brings up another interesting the subject of the amino spiking that took place about a decade ago.
Yeah. I wonder if you can just get there with straight glycine, the smallest amino acid, or creatine or something, because, you would need a lot of nitrogen to test out at 30 grams of protein. I don't even know if you can get there at 7. Yeah.
Even if you had 30 grams of glycine, would it test out the very same as 30 grams of like whey protein? Because you've got a whole bunch of other amino acids that have more nitrogen on them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Or would you really dupe it by using things like arginine, where it's got like a whole bunch of nitrogen in the side chain, and then you can use 30 grams of arginine, and it might test out at like 38 grams of protein.
Yeah, you would, if you followed that methodology, which is sort of the industry standard, then you would need to stack it with tons of high nitrogen concentrated molecules that would allow you for that quantity of nitrogen that would then calculate up to grams of protein based upon the conversion factor.
Now, I bet if
there's all kinds of wrong in there.
If you took an equal amount of creatine's got a whole bunch of nitrogen, even more than arginine does, like on a per capita basis, that would test out to be higher protein if you just did all creatine.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, him talking, that one.
I love these
Meeting
tubs.
our protein needs, and certain protein sources like whey protein and others can be as little as 20% absorbable. This is 99% absorbable, and it has all of the essential amino acids that the body needs to build lean muscle, to recover, to improve our exercise performance, and most importantly, to repair after we have intense exercise. And like I said, 99% absorbable. It only has 2 calories. Eventually, the caloric intake has virtually no caloric intake. It will not break a fast. It tastes amazing. You mix it in water. I take this literally every single morning. If you're working out in a fasted state, you have to take a full spectrum amino acid prior to your workout to preserve your lean muscle and make sure that you're recovering properly. And again, it will not break your fast. They actually come in capsules if you're on the go, or it comes in several flavors that they make in a powder, which I love. It's flavored with natural means of flavoring, so there's no artificial sweeteners in here. So this is one of my absolute favorite products. Give it a try. If you're working out at all, you need a full spectrum amino acid. I love their lab tested products. You can actually see the absorption rate for all of their products. They've got great electrolyte protein combinations. My favorite is the perfect aminos. Ostava.
All right. So
Let's go look at the panel.
That was fun.
he peppered in a little bit of truth. But then there's like a whole bunch of what about the whey protein having a 20% absorption profile?
I don't know where they get that stuff from.
I think he just made that up.
I just love to see the look on Mother Nature's face, just smack them. That's it makes no sense. And the only way that there's going to be no calories, because totally that's that's just a non-compliant label, because you have to label the calories. He doesn't know.
Looks at the label and says a thing.
But maybe it's 99% absorbed and then immediately is urinated out. Therefore, you get no calories from the amino acids.
But we just talked about that there's calories from amino acids.
Yes, there are.
Just the regular perfect amino so we can see the supplement facts panel on it.
Hey, and just, for those that aren't sure, like you're on the fence as to whether or not there are calories in amino acids, go to a paper on PubMed by James Hill out of Colorado. It's just, like a decade and a half, a couple decades ago. But
he's got a chart.
Yeah, he's got a chart. And it lists all the amino acids and the caloric value of the amino acids. So, it's there.
So, okay, this guy's got, he's going to have more calories coming from the citric acid. It's cassava. It's natural citric acid.
They don't claim the calories at all here.
He's got thaumatin hidden in there too. So that's another protein. It's probably less than a gram, but still.
He's not claiming any protein on the SFP.
But on a supplement facts panel, isn't he obligated to place the amount of calories as long as it's over 5? And look again, 7.25 grams.
So like 2 grams of citric acid and flavoring. 2.5.
Now, if you go back over to the TikTok thing, what was the lady who said that it was a scam? Because there's more to that.
Supplement Scams Part 5. Today we're going to go over Perfect Aminos by Gary Brecka. If you're new here, my name is Lexi. I have my degree in exercise physiology. I am a personal trainer.
She's dangerous.
And I love to look at supplements, looking at the dosages of each ingredient on the supplement label, telling you if it's going to match the claim. Are you
Bro, this is 4
your
minutes
money?
long.
I don't care what you do. I'm not making money, and I'm not trying to sell you anything.
Means the rant could be
I'm gonna
good,
go over
though.
all the claims that I see made by the supplement, and then I'm going to tell you why I just don't agree with it. So it's supposed to help build lean mass. It's supposed to enhance recovery. It's supposed to help you fight hunger and sugar cravings. It's supposed to be anti-aging. It's also supposed to build 6 times the protein of whey.
Okay, there we go.
Equal 10 eggs. All from the website.
Some
verbatim.
juicy ones.
There are other claims. These are just the ones that stand out most to me. Red flag number 1 is the nutrition label. It says proprietary blend. Why do I think that's a scam?
You got
Because
better than
everything
that.
The supplement world should tell you the exact ingredient with the exact dosage of that ingredient on there. It's third-party tested too, which is great, but when a proprietary blend goes to a third-party testing, they use NSF. NSF signs an NDA so they can keep disclosed the blend. So it can be 90% ingredients on there of this blend of the cheapest.
Out of
least
curiosity, what's the
bioavailable
first amino acid on that?
acids, and they're getting
Leucine. Okay. You can forgive him on that. He's got his BCAAs first. Then he's got
We're
lysine.
just putting a sprinkle
And then
of the good stuff like leucine in there. I'm not saying that for a fact. No one can because it's a proprietary blend. If the supplement company cared about you, it would just tell you the ingredient.
Pause again.
dosage. They already paid for the third.
So going back to the supplement facts panel on that one. So other than the BCAAs, which are top 3 contenders, what's the next cheapest amino acid on that list?
I don't know.
You have those are
I believe it's the next amino acid on the list.
lysine.
Yeah.
So those are all 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the essentials.
But one of the things I find very common amongst essential amino acid blends is that they are dosed favorably to the cheapest amino acids first, which is usually lysine and threonine. Methionine is used in such low doses, same with tryptophan, histidine being the most expensive out of that entire group, which is also the last ingredient on this panel.
How much protein did they say that they were getting? They were getting 20% more protein intake or something like that? Or
So they were saying that whey protein only absorbs 20% and that this product increases protein synthesis 6 times more than whey protein.
But it's just EAAs.
It is EAAs. It's an economic blend of EAAs too.
Is there any merit to EAAs in general increasing protein synthesis up to 20%?
Well, the EAAs are, that's really the business part of building muscle, building protein, because those are the amino acids that can't be made. Plus, certain ones will have, they'll play a role in stimulating the processes that enable more protein to be made. In general, essential amino acids are a good option for, to be used in times when you can't have protein. And they can, depending if you sort of match the essential amino acid content, they can have about the same protein synthesis in muscle for the first few hours, but then it sort of begins to wane off a little bit because the intact protein tends to deliver the other amino acids as well, because once you still need all of the building block amino acids to effectively build protein within cells.
That's something interesting, though. Has anyone created an EAA based on the frequency of EAAs that are already found in whey protein? I don't think anyone's done that.
like try and reconstruct a protein using EAAs?
It's like a deconstructed whey protein in the form of EAAs and the same
reverse engineer?
frequency of the occurrence of those amino acids.
It goes
in
back
whey.
to like those chains. It depends on the chains, right? Like they have to.
Yeah. So when we built all 9 at Dymatize, that was
the premise. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Is all 9 still around?
I don't think so.
That sucks.
I don't know. That was one of my favorites.
But anyway, do we want to keep going on her?
No, it's 4 minutes long. Screw that.
It's 4 minutes long. It's proprietary blend, and it looks like it's economically,
I like the
made.
tub. I've been trying to look for that cap for a while now.
Have you really?
I found it
The navy blue soft touch.
in the 120 millimeter.
Is it custom embossed?
No, but it's
Theirs custom embossed? That's
it's a
the question.
custom. I know who makes it.
It's a spillover from those guys.
I know who makes it. I found it, but it's expensive.
All right. So the last one is an interestingly controversial subject. It's hydrogen water. Have you heard of this?
I have.
It's been making some circles lately.
And TikTok's the perfect place to really kind of do this stuff. This guy, this guy does it all.
It's the same guy.
It's the same guy.
Published clinical studies on the benefits of hydrogen water, including reduced inflammation, better absorption of your supplements, better absorption of your foods, better balance of the stomach acid, and it feeds an entire class of bacteria in your gut. Echo Go Plus. The Echo Go Plus is a hydrogen water
he's selling a
generator
bottle.
that you can take on the go. You essentially take the
a
top
good-looking
off
bottle.
of this bottle, you pour bottled water in this, and repeatedly it will make high part per million hydrogen water. You press this little button, you'll see these bubbles going up in the water. That's hydrogen being created in the water. Hydrogen water, in my opinion, is the most beneficial water that you can drink, and now you can take it wherever you go. There are all kinds of peer-reviewed published...
It's a good looking bottle.
Well, I think this is like an evolution of alkaline water. So what have you heard about hydrogen water, and what do you think about it?
Pretty much that. I mean, I remember digging around, in PubMed and, just looking for anything.
Sergei Ostoyek is a huge researcher in it.
What's that?
Sergei Ostoyek, the guy who's done like creatine research and GAA research. He's part of the ISSN.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to think of it, to be honest. I mean, to be fair, is this H2?
Yes.
It is H2.
That's what they're claiming. But my problem is his fancy little bottle is probably got some device in there that's doing electrolysis of water, splitting it into oxygen and H2. Those bubbles are very big and they're coming to the surface. So it's like, wouldn't that just vaporize right off?
Yeah.
You could take a match, maybe if you're lucky, and light it on fire. And the electrolysis of water is like kind of what makes rocket fuel, and it's what steams out the back end of a rocket is the reconstitution of hydrogen and oxygen. And I was a huge skeptic on this at first. But given that if the bubbles are sufficiently small, that those gaseous bubbles can be dissolved into that liquid in the very same way that CO2 is dissolved in our blood, in the same way that oxygen is dissolved in the water that the fish breathe. So I'm skeptical of most of these. I'm even skeptical of this hydrogen water that I'm drinking right here, but it does claim 2.5 parts per billion. Million or billion? I don't even know. I thought it said on the front. It said on the front of the box. But anyway,
Is it tasty though?
it's a good water.
Yeah.
It's a good, nice, clean water. I'll
It's just
give
water.
it
There's
that.
no flavor to it.
But I think it takes like a pretty good feat to have like bubbles that are small enough to where they stay dissolved in the water.
Well, how
and
would
don't
you know
just
without? You'd have
come
to
up the
test
top.
it right then and there, right?
Well, you have to test right then and there. I mean, I should probably ship some of this off to my buddies in Arizona and just have them do an analysis and see if they can figure out how much H2 is actually in this.
Now that it's been open for like an hour.
Not that I'm going to give them a sealed one. Give them the benefit of the doubt.
So what's the benefit of having hydrogen water?
The shtick is it's like an antioxidant against like free radicals. So
And he's saying it like absorption of this and that.
I think that's loose. given like a best case scenario, if you decrease the amount of total like reactive oxygen species and therefore like all your cells are a lot more healthy, then maybe then you could absorb things better. But you got to be creating a lot of reactive oxygen species, and some of that is just like a natural consequence of metabolism in general. And some of those reactive oxygen species have a job. Like that's like how most of your immune system works, is like it finds a bacteria and pumps it full of reactive oxygen species. But it is in that sense like an antioxidant. It's something that's saying, okay, you have a negative charge. I'm going to come in here and all of a sudden take that away from you. I think that there's something there.
You bought it.
I did buy it because I am interested in it.
Can't we just do like a hydrogen breath test?
Yeah. Is it in your cells then? Or is it just coming right up? Or if I were to drink this, do a hydrogen breath test and burp into a tube or whatever and find out if, am I creating more H2 coming out of the caldera, or am I looking for how much of it ends up in the blood? Do you measure it in the blood, or is it spent like that?
Well, I would say
that's a long journey for that thing to go.
No, but so I would say drink that, wait an hour, and then we'll do a hydrogen breath test
to see if it's coming out just as a consequence of the stomach acid.
If it's actually getting into your body, it's being circulated to your lungs, and you're breathing it out.
That is a good point.
It's a very simple test.
There's all kinds of new fun little analytical things that people are doing personalized nutrition based off of what they breathe out.
Mm-hmm.
I got put onto that a couple of months ago. There's a friend of mine who's like, we're going to start doing personalized nutrition based off of what people breathe out. And I was like, what?
Can you figure out like how much protein they need?
There is a shocking amount of stuff you can figure out.
Yeah.
Like I was like, you got to give me something more than this. Like at first, you can understand like basal metabolic rate by how much CO2 they're breathing out. Like there's like old people smell.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing. That's a thing that is a consequence of their microbiome.
Oh, I thought that was like a teeth thing.
Is that not a consequence of their microbiome?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, for people who are lactose intolerant. And then the bacteria get at it and they generate hydrogen gas. So, that's one of the ways that they can kind of assess for lactose intolerance. Why not just let your microbiome do this for you?
Yeah.
I have one more question about protein.
Okay.
Like when they add like lactase and different type of enzymes to like break down, like what's with that? Is there like a certain amount? Like is there any merit to it, or it's just there as an enzyme, right, to help with people who are quote unquote lactose intolerant? But you're seeing it in a lot of whey protein blends.
Yeah, I think for most people, it's not really going to have a big impact.
Why not?
Well, especially for a lot of people who are already strong digesters, they're producing plenty of. And then sometimes it'll just say protease, and there's like 7 to 9 proteases that are the prime proteases. So which one and why? I don't know if I'm on board by adding 250 milligrams of a proprietary digestive enzyme blend that contains an amylase, a lipase, and a protease, and you're like, does that matter? I would, again, I think for most people who utilize a lot of protein supplements that are, young or, young middle or, of that, I think they're probably doing pretty well from a digestion and efficiency standpoint. I would like to know more if there is good application for people who, have more digestive issues. And what levels would be used to sort of personalize it a little bit based upon their condition. Older individuals, people with maybe that fail to produce adequate stomach acid. There's probably a few situations in there where a well thought out and proven level of specific digestive enzymes may be helpful, but just to dump it into like a whey powder, and to, who's primarily the user and how, the age and the health of that individual, I don't think for the most part it's helpful.
There's a lot of variables too, like how much and what's effective and whether it's, I guess there's probably a good ratio between of how much proteose you need to lactose or whey for it to actually work.
And it's going to be,
And everyone's biome's different.
yeah.
So
And you're going to get more lactose in WPC than WPI. And I can't wait to see someone who has WPI that's actually got lactase in it, because it's like, what's that? It's kind of pissing in the wind.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good point that when, if you're adding an amylase, which, the type of carbohydrate that you would find in maybe a dairy type protein, it's almost not, it's not really going to have an impact. That would be more for breaking down, a complex carbohydrate that would be in wheat or something like that versus, carbohydrate that you would find in a dairy-based protein is sugars, primarily lactose and to a much lesser extent, like glucose and so forth, but it's primarily lactose.
So label dressing for the most part. And is there any degradation that happens like when it's in the tub? Because it's like sitting there swimming around with all that
Usually
stuff.
not unless it's wet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Once it gets wet, then the fireworks go off.
Oh yeah, that's when the show happens.
Anyway, Rob, I really appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you if they want to find out more about like your protein recommendations or any of these fun things?
Well, please visit us at the International Protein Board. So it's internationalproteinboard.org. You can, certainly look me up on LinkedIn, send me a note on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find on the internet, so forth and so on. Also have an athletic brand called TYMAthleticperformance.com. So it's TYM, performance.com. And that's a brand that primarily serves high level athletes that we use with, a lot of the players that you'll see playing on Sundays. And, just reach out and say hi.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks for listening on the Suppworks podcast.